Hello and welcome back. This video is going to go into the strategy behind our approach to every passage of the ACT Reading Comprehension section. If you haven't already seen the video with the intro so you know what to expect in the section and how to practice for the section, go watch that first because that will be important. But then we'll get into here and how to actually tackle each passage individually. As always, if you find this helpful, you can help me out by leaving a like and subscribing. With that, let's get into it. This first slide, if you did watch my first video, is going to look familiar. It's just a quick recap on the overall strategy within this section. You have 8.5 to 9 minutes per passage. I'm going to spend less than half of that time reading the passage to make sure that you have more than half the time to actually find answers to your questions, because that should take a little longer. Do not read the questions first before reading, because you do not have time for that. You'll end up wasting way too much of your time reading the questions before you even have any idea what they're talking about. In the ACT, most of them are going to be based on finding your answer in the passage rather than some kind of generic idea that you can look for more easily while reading. Because you're never going to remember all the little details they want you to find if you read the questions first. So don't do it. You're just going to run out of time and put yourself behind if you do that. So that breaks down to about 3 to 4 minutes reading the passage, if at all possible. People read at different speeds, so you're going to have to find out where you are. And most people are going to have to read faster. So in that case, aim to read a little faster than where you are comfortable. If you were reading a book, you're probably going to read at some speed. Most likely, you're going to have to go faster than that. You don't want to go to a full skim to where you're not understanding anything that's going on, but you are probably going to have to go a little bit faster than your normal reading speed. Just keep in mind, you're not going to have to answer these questions from memory. You're just going to need to focus on what's this roughly talking about and where is it talking about each thing. So that way, when you get to the questions asking you to go find something, you might have an idea of where to go look. That's all you really need to accomplish in your read. Don't reread any paragraphs or lines as you go. If you find you kind of zoned out a little bit while you're going and reading too quickly, or you didn't really understand with the wording, don't worry about it. Just keep moving on. You can come back and read that section again if you have to, only if there's a question related to it, because it might not matter. There might not be a question about that, and then you would have just wasted that time rereading it. Always, for your questions, go back to the passage and try to find the support for your answer, assuming you have time. Don't use this as an excuse to just never go back. Practice trying to go back. Because again, the ACT questions, most of the answers are written right in the passage, or even their inference-based ones are very heavily supported and hinted at. So you don't have to just kind of guess your way through them. So if you can find it, you can really feel very strongly about your answer and know you got it right, as long as you don't fall for one of the traps. But just keep in mind, as always, with everything in the reading comprehension, timing is just as important, if not more so, than accuracy. So if you don't know where to find something, do not waste time looking for it all over the place. In that case, you might be better off eliminating what you can, guessing, and moving on. You can always come back if you have time left over at the end of the section to get those hard ones where you had to skip. You can't just make up more time to try and finish the ones if you just run out of time. The first question or two for each passage is often going to ask about the whole passage as a whole, so just make sure that your answer for them is going to apply to the majority of the passage, not just one small part of it. That's a common trap answer they're going to like to do. All right, so how do I handle the read? That 3 to 4 minutes read, what am I going for? As I said, you're just trying to have an idea of roughly what's it about and know where to find things if they ask about it. Now, while you are reading, big question, should I annotate, meaning highlight, underline, make notes, that sort of thing? The answer, yeah, probably. If I ask any of my students when they first come in, do you think we should annotate? Almost all of them say no, I don't annotate, it's just going to slow me down. I'm not good at that. Most of them are wrong there. I want to stress that. Try the annotations first. They'll take some getting used to, but they're very helpful. Now, some students don't annotate. There's very, very few cases where I've ended up deciding with my student and their situation, you're actually really good at remembering where to find things, and the act of underlining all these things is not necessary and it's just slowing you down, but that's very rare. For most people, we do annotate, it's just going to be a matter of figuring out how much. So, now I'll go into what should we annotate. Keeping in mind that the amount is going to depend on the person. Different ways of annotating are going to work better for different people. So you might have to experiment a little bit and find what works for you. So for most, annotations are going to be helpful. And just keep in mind, when you first try it out, it's going to slow you down and make it harder to finish on time. But as you get better at annotating, and you might have to adjust your annotation strategy a little bit, but first try the full annotation for a while until you can kind of get used to it. Then you can start tweaking your annotations because you are just going to get faster naturally as you get used to highlighting, underlining, that sort of thing. Now, how do we actually do that? We're going to focus on 4 things that I'm going to go into on the following slides. Those are going to be the things to look out for. Do not underline or highlight multiple lines in a row. That's going to take too much time. Instead, use brackets. You can use that in the margin. You can either do beginning and end of a sentence. It's easier to put them in the margins. Just say, okay, from here down to here along the sides of this paragraph was something I thought was important. Do not annotate a name or proper noun every time you see it. Like if you think this important person is I need to underline, don't do it every single time you see that person. Only annotate the first time that person is introduced. That is going to be one of the 4 things that we go into. I'll go into that more later, but don't underline them every single time. All right, one other thing I forgot to put there. Don't write words or notes in the margins. If you're actually writing things out, that's taking too much time. It's not worth it for most people. Okay, what are the 4 things that we need to look for? First, and most importantly, now where I say most importantly, I'm going to start where there aren't a ton of these, but when you do see them, there's often a question about them. So they won't take too much time to annotate, but they are important to find. And that would be attention-grabbing punctuation. What I mean by that would be italics, bold, all caps. Those are all used to draw attention to something that is important. If the author thought something was important enough to use these, ACT is probably going to ask about it. Quotation marks often indicate sarcasm. Emotional language is something that they like to ask questions about. Quotation marks is a way to show sarcasm. Exclamation marks tells you that somebody feels very strongly about something. That's something that they like to ask about in that case. And then parentheses, used only for interrupters, which I know in English we'll often be like, okay, we have an interrupter, we can take it out. It's not important. In this case, grammatically that's true, but the author thought it was important enough to have to interrupt the sentence to put it in there. So that information might actually be important, and that's something that the ACT might ask about. They often like to do so. Next will be emotion language. That could be any language indicating the emotion of either a character or the author. The ACT is going to ask a surprisingly large number of questions based on this. The emotions, the tone, the reaction of a character or the author to some piece of information or some event. So anytime you see something indicating emotion, mark it. Highlight it if you're on the online one. If you're in person, underline it, make a little bracket, something to draw your attention. If you want to make up your own symbols, so like a star indicates emotion, maybe an exclamation mark in the margin means attention-grabbing punctuation. That's something you can try and experiment with, so that way you can have a quick note that indicates what's going on here, or at least there's something important. The third thing would be time jumps. There's not a lot of them, but if you do see a flashback or a flash forward, you really need to know that's what just happened. Because if you do, almost every time there's going to be a question that asks, which of the following things happened first chronologically? Chronologically means in order according to a timeline. So if you were to put on a calendar and a clock the order of events that happened in this story, the first one is what they're looking for. This is almost never going to be the first option that you come across in the passage. So if it's mentioned in the first paragraph, like, oh, that's the first thing I read, that must be the first thing chronologically. That's not true. There's probably a flashback somewhere that actually goes backwards in time, and whatever they were talking about in there happened first, chronologically speaking. So if you see a flashback, note it, because then as soon as you see that question, you can go right to that flashback and you're going to find your answer there. The last thing can be a little bit more cumbersome. This is going to be the bulk of your annotations, because the three we just talked about, there's not a lot of them, but they're very important. This is extremely important, but there are a lot of them. So trying to tailor this to what works for you is going to take some practice. But the first time you see any new proper noun, so that would be something that's capitalized, a person, so their name, a place, a location, or any capitalized object. If you see one of these in a question, the answer about them is normally going to be very close, within a paragraph or two, to when they were first introduced. Because unless it's the one thing that the entire passage is about, where it's mentioned all over the place, most other things, they're introduced at one spot, and then they only really talk about it around that point, within that paragraph, maybe into the next paragraph. So if you know they introduced the Hubble telescope in the third paragraph, and then a question talks about the Hubble paragraph, or the Hubble telescope, you're going to know, because I underlined, go through my underlines, there's Hubble, I'm going to start here at paragraph 3, look there, and in the next paragraph, paragraph 4 maybe, and that's where my answer is. If I can't find it then, I'm probably going to run out of time, so I'm just going to guess at that point and move on. So clearly you don't want to look before the point where something was first introduced, because they haven't talked about it yet. So if you know they started talking about the Hubble telescope in paragraph 3, then I don't have to bother looking through paragraph 1 or 2 for that question. All right, so now that you know how to annotate, let's talk about those trap answers I was talking about. They're very common. Since you're not testing any rules like the English section, they're trying to see, are you paying attention and can you pay attention within these time constraints? So don't assume that there's only a few of these. You really want to be careful. There's going to be two main types that you need to watch out for. First, the answer that's found in the passage, but it doesn't actually answer the question being asked. So you might have a specific detail question asking, what color was this truck? And one of your answer choices says that something was orange. This is extremely basic example, so it's probably not something they're going to have. But let's say you go in and they were talking about something that was orange. So you might go back and scan and be like, oh, look, orange is mentioned. That's it. But it was asking about the truck, not something else. So that's still a wrong answer. So in order to avoid these, read the questions very carefully so you know exactly what is being asked. That way, when you find your answer choice in the passage, you can know, did that actually answer the question, or is that something else, even though it is in the passage? The other main thing is one where the majority of your answer is perfect and accurate, but there's one small part that's wrong. Could just be one word that's just factually incorrect. If that's the case, that answer is wrong. You have to go to another one. Even if you liked all the rest of the answer, it doesn't matter. So for this one, you need to read every answer completely. Don't just read into like, oh, I like what this is talking about. This first part is exactly the answer I was looking for. I'm good. Keep reading your answer because there might be something towards the back end that's just wrong. The entire answer has to be correct. Now let's talk about that double passage because it is a little different. For those, you're going to have two smaller essays instead of just one. And in this case, what you're going to have with these two short articles are questions split into three parts. First one is going to have questions on passage A, the second one is going to have questions on passage B, and the third one is going to have questions about both passages. So, for those that talk about both the passages, I'll go back, make sure that your answer choice accurately reflects both passages, not just one. Now, to handle these, it's generally best to read both of those passages first and then go to all the questions. I do have Students ask, should I maybe read passage A, then answer those questions, then passage B, and then answer the rest of the questions. For some people, that works pretty well, and I'll go into when you might want to, but for most, it's best to read both passages back to back, and then go to all your questions. The reason for that, it's easier to identify the similarities and differences if you read them back to back, so you can immediately be comparing them. It's also easier to keep track of your timing. If we're trying to stick to our 3 to 4 minutes reading, it's kind of hard to do that if I only read half of it and then go answer questions, then come back and read the other half. If I read all of them at once, I can aim for that 3 to 4 minutes and know I'm still on track. If, however, you find that you often forget what happened in that first passage and you keep missing the questions in that first section that are about passage A, that's when I would consider answering the questions on passage A immediately after reading passage A. Then you can go back and read passage B and answer the rest of the questions. For those questions that ask about both of the passages, you need to make sure that your answer applies to both of the passages. Common trap answer on those will be one that applies only to one. It applies really well, but it has nothing to do or is just completely inaccurate for the other one, and therefore it's the wrong answer. So that'll do it for our approach to each passage. Again, this is really going to come down to experience and practice. So get some practice tests in your hands and start taking them. Apply these strategies, start tweaking them as you go, figure out what do I want to try and change, what do I need to try and improve, and then move on to try it again, specifically attempting those things. My next video is going to go into a few of those little tweaks and things to try to really improve your timing and get down to that specific amount of time that you need to finish the test. So I would recommend you go watch that video so you can know some things you can try, and hopefully you can get there without too much of a hard time. But it will take a little bit of practice. Don't expect it to just happen overnight. So I'll see you on the next one. Good luck on your studying.